The Sony Vaio PCV RX850 is kind of an odd looking computer, as the Sony Vaio machines of the early 2000s were designed to kind of stand out. But under the hood, it's a pretty standard desktop for that time period, sporting a Pentium 4 processor at 2.4 gigahertz, 512 megabytes of RAM expandable to 1.5 gigabytes. Both a CD rewrite drive and a DVD-ROM drive. Has a number of USB 2 ports, as well as iLink, which was essentially the brand name that Sony gave its version of FireWire, and did for a time compete with USB, but was largely replaced by the time that USB 3.0 came out. And the computer also came with this neat little hidden away 3.5-inch floppy drive that was largely legacy at this point. People weren't using a whole lot of floppy drives in the early 2000s, had mainly been replaced by USB, but there was still a lot of data floating around on floppy drives, hence why they were still often a part of these systems. Now, the back of the case here, you'll mainly find standard ports and components. There are a couple of things I want to point out, though. One is that it does have an optical port, which is a little odd, but allows connections of speakers and so forth that use that connection. And then also you've got a port here for 12 volt DC input, and that's where your speakers typically would go into. The Sony Vaio speakers would connect into there instead of actually having their own power supply and plug. Came with Windows XP operating system, and this was typically marketed to the home as a multimedia computer, plug and play, and it would have been a little on the expensive side, competing mainly with Apple and IBM around that time period. And this computer system is really kind of the epitome of the golden era for Sony desktop computers, which actually no longer exist. So you may actually own a new Vaio system, but it's going to be a laptop, because Vaio actually spun off from Sony as its own company in, I believe it was 2014. So Sony owned that brand up until then. But yeah, they made at least a couple major different models of desktop computers in the early 2000s and late 90s, of which this is an example. And their designs are always a bit different. They're always a little wacky, and they did stand out. And you had people that thought they were the ugliest thing ever, and then other people who thought that they were just beautiful. And I never felt all that strongly about them. I think I kind of thought the designs were they're kind of interesting, and I did really want one, back when I was in college, but certainly couldn't afford a Sony Vaio, couldn't afford an IBM either. So those were kind of two brands that were definitely off the table, because they were a little more expensive than many of the other brands of the time. But I was able to get together most of the components of this system, and the monitor, it's an LCD. You could have gotten a CRT or an LCD in 2002. Both was available. Probably the CRT would have been cheaper. It would have matched the system. It would have been, this grayish tan color instead of black. Could have actually gotten an LCD, and maybe you've seen these that are all silver as well instead of black like this. But this is one of the monitors that you could have gotten with the system. I'm pretty sure about that. The speakers, of course, go along with it. They're one of a couple different speakers that would come with these Sony Vaio systems. Not super good speakers, but they're not terrible either. They're kind of mid-range for default speakers, part of these packages. And I don't have the mouse, so that's one of the things I still need to get. But occasionally you do see those pop up on eBay, so I'll just keep looking for those. So what I thought we'd do, kind of, mostly normal stuff, take a look at the inside, what we've got in there, and so forth. But first of all, I want to share with you Quake Arena because there was no other game that I was playing more in my college days in 2002 than Quake Arena, and we would play that, I don't know, usually until sometime early in the morning there in my dorm, and it was just a lot of fun playing with other students in my dorm building there. Good times. So even though this is not 3D, or it is 3D accelerated, but doesn't have a dedicated graphics card, should run Quake 3 Arena just fine. So let's do that first, and then take a look at the inside here. Quake 3 Arena time, only $70. What a deal. Okay, so this was released in 1999. As you can probably kind of see here, hopefully, the minimum requirements for this thing is 233 megahertz MMX Pentium. So that is the original Pentium, not even Pentium 2, though it does say Pentium 2 266 is recommended for this. So the Pentium 4 that we got in there blows that completely out of the water. As does the 512 megabytes of RAM we got in there. It only requires 64. Now it does say 3D hardware accelerator, and I think the onboard video on this computer has that. But yeah, it has an AGP slot, but it is not being used, so you don't actually have a dedicated graphics card. So we'll see how this performs. Now I've got a clean install of Windows XP on here. The only thing I have loaded, in fact, is Quake 3 Arena. Now the DVD drive is a little loud. It's really not bad though for an onboard video. I just suck at it, basically. Yeah, I don't want to blame it on the computer, but I don't really like how the keyboard feels. Doesn't feel very responsive. Alright, I'm giving up. So yeah, it plays, just not not terrific, and I probably really couldn't turn up the graphics much higher than that. The oddity of this case certainly extends to how it is opened, and you can actually take off the top, or you can take off the right side panel here in order to access the various internal components. So in order to take the top off, just lift up on these two tabs and pull back, and the whole top lifts off like that. Probably easier to access those optical drives from the top down rather than trying to go in from the side. Now in order to get the side panel off here, all I should have to do is actually kind of pull forward on this tab here and then push outwards on the side panel, and it should come off that way. Now looking inside the case here, it becomes pretty clear that they really kind of pack things in here pretty tightly. In fact, it's really kind of difficult to get to anything on the motherboard because, well, the PSU is right up in front. Not that that was really, terribly uncommon for a lot of these older desktops to kind of have the power supply, actually sitting vertically here in the front, but it's never a design that I, particularly like because, yeah, it's right here in front and makes it difficult to get to the other stuff. So do have the hard drive here, And there's actually space, as you can see, for a second hard drive if you wanted to expand it that way. Do have access to the floppy drive, and that's about it. In order to get the optical drives out, I'd imagine you'd actually have to maybe go in from the top there in order to make that happen. So looking up in there, you can see that there is, in fact, that AGP slot that you could put a dedicated graphics card in there. And you could actually put a pretty powerful card in there. It's a 4X AGP. Certainly would be much better than the onboard video that we're currently working with here. All right, guys, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you very much for watching. This Sony Vaio system that I have here. Again, kind of an odd duck. Really does stand out, and even opening the case is kind of particular and peculiar. And but I don't know. I kind of like it, and I kind of like these secret compartments that it has. I don't know, there's something about it, and I don't mind the overall design either. I know some people really hate it. And certainly newer than a lot of the systems that I'm going to be showing as part of this channel and as part of the series on, putting the computers together in their original configuration, most of which are most likely going to be quite a bit older than this one. But I don't know. I always wanted a Sony Vaio system, and here I finally got it. A little late, but I suppose late's better than never, huh?